Hello guys, thanks for stopping by. Today is Wednesday the 2nd of September 2015. Well, it certainly came round quickly. We're finally here in the key pivotal month of September 2015. Now this video is not about dates or planned events, many of which are going to go well under the radar of the average person, by the way. My thoughts on this are not to get too excited or too fearful. Many of the happenings and events planned for September are like all of the other elitist, New World Order, Luciferian type agendas. The big events happen behind the curtain, away from the eyes of the average person. These things are classic misdirections, and we're going through a very similar process now, where there's lots of information being thrown out into the mainstream, and especially the alternative media, because they know this is where it's going to circulate, about all sorts of planned events and celestial happenings and so forth. Now, somebody once said, if you want to tell a lie and tell a lie well and get it to stand, then add a little bit of truth into that. And that seems to be what is going on with the elitists. There are a lot of natural and celestial events, and there are lots of coincidences, shall we say, and confluences within September, which makes fertile ground for misdirection and disinformation. So people are looking in one direction while what's really going on is in the other direction. But I'm not on here today to talk about September. I did a video where I explained what was likely to happen, and for those people who intended to hear that, they've heard it. It's now been pulled, and I don't intend to put it back up again. But a video which I currently have up, which is on a completely different subject, a longer term agenda, somebody contacted me and he made a very valid point, and they said to me, you said in your video about the shelter in place becoming a very large part of societal control and linking it to Agenda 21 and all sorts of various other agendas. Do you think that's really going to happen, and can you elaborate on that within a different context? Well, I don't generally respond to individual comments and messages by making a video, but I thought it was a very valid point. And the scenario that I raised in my fictional account in one of my other videos to illustrate a point was one that I had taken for granted, but in hindsight, perhaps that too had slipped under the radar for many people. I know that a lot of people are switched on to this, but thinking about it, it may not be as apparent as I initially had thought. So I'll recover that. And this is particularly important for my American friends. The United Kingdom has had plans in place for some time to lock the population down, to control the movement, to do as our friends in the United States say, shelter in place. And in fact, recently we had quite a big story, and I say big because it was unusually reported in all of the mainstream press. And when that happens, that generally means that the powers that be want the populace to be aware of something, because obviously if they didn't, there's no way that it would appear in the mainstream press, and it certainly would not keep reappearing and being repeated by the repeaters that we call news readers. And that story was about Gordon Brown's ex-advisor. Now, Gordon Brown, for those who may be listening in another country, was, of course, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Several years ago, he took over from Tony Blair. And Gordon Brown's advisor, Damien McBride, warned people that they should store significant quantities of bottled water and tinned food should they be unable to leave their homes for an extended period. Now, for most people, a significant quantity is about 2 days' worth. That's what most people think is stocking up. Oh, we'll get a couple of days' worth of canned food and a couple of days' worth of bottled water. Well, this guy actually said you need 1 month's worth. You need to be able to survive 1 month within your own home, not being allowed or able to leave it. Now, to those who have switched on, that is clear, unequivocal evidence that the UK also have plans to initiate the so-called shelter-in-place doctrine. I am, of course, talking about travel restrictions, whereby a population will not be allowed to migrate during a period of crisis. In my other video, I used the example of an economic collapse, and it would be just as relevant if there's a complete economic collapse. I mean, let's just clarify this economic collapse issue. I mean, anyone who listens to my videos and subscribes to this channel will be well aware that I have stressed on many occasions that we are already living through the economic collapse. It's a slow burn, and there may or may not be a single climatic event that's going to wake up the masses. But make no mistake, this is it. This is what collapse looks like. This is similar to what happened in the collapse of the Soviet Union. When people look back in history, they seem to think it was one overnight pivotal event, and the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet troops withdrew, and that was it. It was the end of the Cold War, and everything had gone, and it basically happened over the course of a weekend. They didn't see what was going on, or at least remember the years of turmoil prior to that, and the massive changes that were already going on. And this is what's happening now. We are living through massive societal and geopolitical change. And when we look back, we will see that it was so obvious with the benefit of hindsight, but because there's this massive fixation with people to look for one key pivotal event, bang, there it goes, that is it, we are now in collapse, it's WROL, SHTF, whatever you've been conditioned or programmed to think. And whilst you're looking for that event, you're missing everything else that is going around you. And to be perfectly honest, that's the intention of the elite. They bombard you with so much information that you don't know which way to turn, left, right, backwards, forwards. And there's just so much going on, and it's overload. And it's much easier for many people to bury their heads in their sand, and indeed that is what they do. But I know I'm rambling again, so forcing myself back to the point in hand here, the issue that I want to address is shelter in place. And the government, all the governments, will have a vested interest in maintaining law and order. Because if law and order is maintained, then the mechanisms of government are maintained. And the easiest way to maintain law and order is to extrapolate the prison model the camp model, whereby you have a totally controlled environment. I think my American friends call it mastering the human domain. And what you're effectively doing is controlling all human activity, whatever that may be. And one of the key elements to that is to control the movement of people. Again, this is particularly important in the United States, where firearms are freely available, and people of every social status have access to a firearm. The United States are in advanced preparations for this, and the United Kingdom have preparations for this, much of it covert. They're not as in your face as the United States, simply because the United Kingdom is a disarmed and pacified nation of mostly sheep anyway, so herding them wouldn't take a great deal of resources and effort, whereas the United States, although they do have a significant population of uninformed sheep, those sheep have teeth in the forms of firearms, and that makes them dangerous. And that is why in the United States you see massive quantities of armour and military equipment moving around the country now. Remember, many months ago I talked about Jade Helm 15, and I said that number 33 was encoded in it, and number 33 was a signature for everyone to see, because it was only coded at level 1 of the exercise name code, and it meant completion of works. And again, if those who remember, I said that was meaning that at the end of the exercise that something big, a big project, will have been completed. And that big project will be the initial phase for the disarmament and control and locking down of the American citizens. And things will develop from there. I don't want to go into that. I mean, I put those videos out months ago, and as I say, those who are meant to have heard the message at those times have heard the messages. So I'm not going to cover it again. But you can clearly see at this stage, with the movement of machinery and armour across the United States, under the cover of this exercise, Jade Helm 15, and even shouting that it's about mastering the human domain, which I mentioned earlier, which will be a requirement for the lockdown. You can see that the preparatory work is well advanced, and the completion of works for that particular aspect will be in place after a key occult date, which, again, as anyone who has followed this channel will know, the leaders of the West are religious fundamentalists, but they're not Christians, they're not Jews, and they're not Muslims. They follow an altogether different religion. And again, for those who have been paying attention and are switched on, it should be quite clear what their religion is. Everyone is going to have access to some form of weapon in the United States if they wanted to access a weapon. And an armed populace roaming through the cities and out of the cities into the countryside, and it would be beyond chaos, absolutely beyond chaos. And so the government are well aware of that, and the government need to prevent that from happening. They do not want tens of millions of armed people wandering round the countryside into other towns, other settlements, and to various aspects of infrastructure, power stations and dams, water supplies, you name it. That is the absolute last thing that they want. So they're not going to allow it to happen. They are going to prevent people moving, and they can snap it on at the click of a fingers. It's all been tested, it's all been tried. Many people will remember the Boston bombing. In Boston, just a few hundred well-placed militarized police units locked down the best part of the city. When reinforcements were brought in, I think the total was only in a few thousand, and that was it. That city was locked down, it was controlled, shelter in place, orders were given, the movement of all civilians were restricted, and it was such a shock to the psyche of the people to be locked down that they were literally stunned. It was almost as if someone had thrown a flashbang at them, and they were stood there with glazed eyes wondering what the heck was going on. And it's likely that there will be a similar type of snap lockdown occur in the future following a significant event, which will stun people and not give them a chance to plan and react. The Boston bombing was obviously a staged beta test. Anyone who's done even the slightest bit of research into this will see that all of the classic mechanisms and procedures for staging an event were in place. But again, it's beyond the scope of this video. I'm just trying to talk about the lockdown that many people are likely to experience, and it's a very, very important thing that you must consider, particularly if you commute to your places of work or you have family that commute into cities and major population centres from the countryside, is because you're going to be stuck there with the lockdown. Imagine a Boston bombing type martial law incident happening today when massive amount of military hardware has now been pre-positioned throughout the United States under the pretexts of an exercise called Jade Helm 15. I've warned about this back in February 2015 about the PSYOP nature of this, and you must watch the left hand rather than the right hand, because there is an awful lot of chicanery going on with this under the cover of a special forces type exercise. And I said it's nothing of the sort, and that's been validated now. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to warn you about this snap-on which you're likely to experience during a crisis, and you're not going to have any time to react. You're going to be overwhelmed. Everything's going to be too quick, and there'll be many other events going on which are going to add to the confusion, which won't cause people to run around the streets waving their hands and panic and wailing. No, what they'll be designed to do is to stun people into acquiescence, to make them do exactly as they're told, and to make it appear as if the militarized police and the military units and the mercenaries, or private contractors as they're commonly known today, are there to protect the people, ostensibly from whatever has happened. So this is something you really do need to consider if you haven't already. In my other video, when I gave the fictional account of the economic collapse and the lockdown and so on, I also mentioned the modification of infrastructure. Again, this is apparent to some people. You can see it if your eyes are switched on to these things, and you can see that much civilian infrastructure, whether that be intersections and highways and road junctions, public buildings, warehouses, school buildings, and even large modern shopping malls, have all been built or modified to have a secondary role in the event of a national crisis. For example, many of the road junctions and highway junctions are brilliant choke points and even block points. Checkpoints can be set up in so many places. The movement of vehicles and people can be easily controlled and diverted. Public buildings can be well defended. There are certain architectural features that can be easily converted. Modern shopping malls have clearly been produced with decorative features that could be converted to guard towers and access control points with ease. And the same with larger buildings such as sports stadiums and larger warehouses. Again, they can be converted into food and resource distribution facilities with access and security tightly controlled. Basically, everything that is required for the complete control of a major population centre is already in place. Even the tanks. I mean, many people have seen, and it's not as prevalent in the United Kingdom, but there's certainly some places in Europe where this has been viewed as well. People have seen footage of hundreds of heavy pieces of armour and support equipment being moved around the United States and much of Europe. Now, in Europe, the movement of heavy armour, of medical equipment, of command and control equipment and infrastructure and communications infrastructure and so forth has been done under the cover of protecting us from Russian aggression. We're moving things forward. We're doing, bringing all this new equipment to strategic points. So should the Russians invade, it'll all be there. And it's absolute BS. Anyone who's been monitoring this situation, keeping an overview, can see that there's more to it. And the types of equipment and the types of resources that have been moved, the Russians could, take it down pretty quickly. I mean, it's not really going to deter the Russians if they wanted to move. It's not that type of equipment. It's the type of equipment that's been moved that you would use to control places like Iraq and Libya, which is societal chaos. And again, in the United States, that's what you're seeing moved around under the cover of these military exercises. You're seeing equipment that can be used to lock down population centres, control the movement of an armed populace. So, going back to the original question, do I really think, there's going to be shelter-in-place orders given? Well, yes, I do, without any shadow of a doubt, because that is the easiest way by far that any government, where even governments with massive resources, such as the United States, are going to be able to control millions and millions of people. Otherwise you just could not do it. And again, remember, surprise is a key element to any security or military operation. You start telling the people, in 2 months we're going to lock down your city, you're not going to be able to move, and nothing you can do about it because we're going to have tanks, heavy armour, and top cover with planes, drones and blimps, so there's nothing you can do. Well, if someone said that, it's going to cause panic, and it's going to disrupt the economy, it's going to disrupt social order, and basically have created the problem that they're trying to solve. So when the lockdown comes, it will come suddenly. And you'll be amazed just how quickly you'll see tanks, armoured vehicles, and you know, basically troops with 50 cals pointed inwards to ensure that the population comply. It'd be quite a scary scenario for many people, and I would not want to be separated from my family when that happened, because I would not really fancy my chances evading every single choke point and checkpoint, and the overwatch which is likely to happen, and several different forms, particularly the technical overwatch, which is now these blimps that use ultra high resolution cameras with thermal imaging, and they can record entire city blocks and through software detect suspicious movements or activity. It's amazing technology, and this has been already trialled. You can do searches for these things on the internet and have a look. There's no secret. These are all things that are designed to be deployed during the lockdown. And the same with drones. Drones have been so well tried and tested now. Every single limitation of these things has been explored. And remember, it'll be multi-layered. You know, you're going to have the standard camera grid. You see security cameras on every street corner and every doorway now, and these can all be integrated through the correct software. Additional cameras can be mounted very, very easily. They're so cheap and easy now to fit, which can be integrated into a system to continue monitoring a town or a city. Integrate all of that, you know, with people, with security personnel, with people who are allied to the security services but will appear, for all intents and purposes, to look like a normal citizen, a panicked sheep, whatever you want to call it. Again, passing real-time info. It's got to be extremely hard for you to get out of a city. That's what I am trying to get across here. And forget about using railways, water points, and sewage systems. You know, anything like that, if it's obvious, going to be well and truly covered, and you'll just be walking into some sort of trap. And the last thing you want is to worsen your situation. I don't expect people to be fired on unless, you know, they fire on the security people first. But imagine the situation: you're trying to exfiltrate a city through a sewer system, and you know they've anticipated this and they've set up points to catch people. Then you find yourself locked up in a camp, and so not only are you now even further away from your family, you've got much less chance of getting out of that camp than you did the city. So you're going to have to play this carefully and intelligently if you do get locked down, and it may well be that, you know, you're going to have to formulate your own plans to deal with that situation. All we can do at this stage, because we've left it too late to do anything to prevent the course of actions which have now been set in motion, all we can do at this stage is to prepare and to consider our own individual parts that we are likely to play in the protection of our own families and people that we care about. As I made the point, anyone who's going to listen to this will already be very switched on, very aware, and chances are they'll also have got something like this in their contingency plans. So there's pointless me, throwing lots of things up in the air and letting a few of the balls drop and weakening the message. There's no point in that. Let's just, keep this short, keep it simple. I told you what I think will happen. If you consider it carefully, you can see that is likely to happen. And you can see everything is almost now fully in place. Apart from the heavy armour being moved forward into the city centre streets and so on, which is not going to happen until after it's locked down anyway, because that's just going to cause so many problems. So these are just going to be kept back in staging areas for now. Right, what I'll do is I will attach to the end of this the part of the other video that I made which prompted the message, which prompted me to make this video. This concludes this video, but I'm going to now tag on to the end the sequence from my previous video for those who may be interested. It's a fictional account but draws upon real available information, and there is a message or two in there for those with the ears to hear it. It is spoken from the perspective of somebody at the end of 2016, early part of 2017, looking back and talking to somebody about events that are happening in 2015 and 2016. But I'm just tagging it on to the end of this video for those people who may be interested. You don't have to listen to it. The video is pretty much ended now, but it's there for your information. So thanks for listening, guys, and take care. The cyber wars have been raging throughout 2015, and towards the end, major attacks had been made on the world's financial infrastructure in both the East and the West. None of the financial markets made any sense anymore. Hackers would crash one system only for a government to reinflate it. Many people had pulled their savings and investments out of the financial markets. It was clear to even the casual observer that the financial markets were a complete sham. And trading bared no resemblance to reality. This was particularly reflected in the precious metals markets, where demand was through the roof, yet prices kept going down, which defied all logic of supply and demand. But in early 2016, the cyber wars entered a new phase, a devastating new phase, and the word derivative became a household name, but for all the wrong reasons. People realized that derivatives were weapons of financial mass destruction. They were fictional instruments created by the global banking elite to create the illusion of a free market, to create the illusion of a functioning financial system, to create the illusion of solvency. The hackers changed all that. The hackers revealed the derivatives to be the hollow shells that they were. But sadly, in doing so, they crashed the entire financial system, because everything was linked to the derivatives market. Absolutely everything. So when the derivatives market was blown wide open, so was everything else. And so as the derivatives were found to be hollow shells, so was everything else. The wealth of individuals and nations alike vanished, seemingly overnight. perhaps it was never really there to begin with. The mainstream media immediately blamed Russian hackers. The alternative media blamed Chinese hackers. Some fringe conspiracy theorists suggested it may have actually been the technocratic Luciferian elite who had originally created derivatives just so that they could crash the financial markets at a time of their choosing. But such theories were classified as nonsense and were completely ignored. But most people didn't really care who did it. What they cared about was their financial system, and more particularly how its collapse has affected them. Shortly after the collapse of the derivative marketplace and the complete decimation of the pension funds, the insurance markets, the stock markets, and the major banking foreign currency exchange markets, a bank holiday was called. The ATM machines were switched off, and people's debit cards and credit cards would no longer work. Those who still had cash in their pockets quickly went to the shops, the stores, the supermarkets, the petrol stations, and within hours, all the food, all the water, the gasoline, useful essential items had gone. The economy had collapsed, and people who had been living a comfortable middle-class lifestyle just months ago were now staring into the abyss. Very few expected to see such total economic collapse. It took many by surprise. Most people were unprepared, and nobody expected the once mighty and wealthy West, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, to go straight to third world status. There were a few people who shouted, "We told you so, we've been warning you for years." But people didn't want to hear that. They were now in dire financial straits, and the last thing they wanted to do was listen to people who were waving a finger at them and saying, "We told you so, we told you. Why didn't you listen to our warnings?" The mainstream media began to pick on these people who apparently had crystal balls and could see into the future to an event and a scenario that nobody else could. According to the mainstream media, these cyber attacks were black swan events, and no one could have possibly prepared for them. And so it was highly suspicious that these groups of dissidents called preppers, later known as hoarders, knew about these things. Perhaps they were involved in some way. Perhaps they were domestic terrorists. And so the meme went through the mainstream media. As a result of this vilification, the prepping, otherwise known as the hoarding domestic terrorists, learned the importance of operational security, learned the importance of being the grey man. In other words, they learned the importance of keeping their mouths well and truly shut during periods of chaos. When people look back, they could see this had been brewing for years. The pressure had been building for years. All of the signs were there, yet most ignored them. And now, reality, they did not know where to turn or to whom. Most of the large stores and the supermarket chains had their stores stripped long ago in the first panic. Many people thought that the stock market and currency crisis of late 2015 was it. It was the collapse. Nobody expected it to get much, much worse. Nobody expected their payments to stop. Nobody expected their bank accounts to vanish. Nobody expected their pensions and savings and investments to disappear. Nobody expected the food shortages and the lack of supplies and the difficulties and the rationing and the electricity and power cuts and the reduced gas supply. Or at least that's what the mainstream media would have us believe, that nobody could have seen this coming and therefore nobody could have prepared for it. Surprisingly, there weren't many riots. There were a few, but they were quickly put down and dealt with. Amazingly, the governments had been undertaking an exercise just at the time of the worst of the collapse, whereby they were training for a societal change, an epoch-changing event, natural disaster or otherwise. So many military machines and pieces of hardware were already pre-positioned around the United States and the United Kingdom and the European Union. Many of the police units and police forces and departments had already been issued with armoured vehicles and military-grade weapons and other hardware so that they could take part in these exercises, or so the mainstream media reported to us. But in the end, it worked out, and many of the people were very pleased that the government had the military on the streets and that the police were all driving round patrolling in bulletproof vehicles. The people were in general pleased that the police and the military had kept them safe from the terrorists, I mean the rioters and the looters. Well, that's what the surveys conducted by the mainstream media and reported on the mainstream news told us anyway. Coinciding with the coincidental exercises that happened to be taking place, coincidentally in all the Western nations, coincidentally all at the same time, coincidentally for a similar type of event, there was coincidentally alterations being made to various parts of the civilian infrastructure. Motorways, or known as freeways in the United States, and highways all over the West were having their exits and entrances modified, having their central reservation areas modified. Major road junctions were modified. Rail stations were modified. And main transit routes into and out of major population centres were modified. These modifications apparently were to make it easier for emergency vehicles to enter and exit these places, and to allow the security services of the police and the military to utilise existing infrastructure for the benefit of the public. The governments had obviously planned long ago that it was much easier to maintain order and control the people if they were confined to their own towns and cities. Mass movements of populations into country areas was the last thing that the governments wanted, because those people would become uncontrollable rabbles. Some of the really lunatic fringe conspiracy theorists suggested that the control of the populations within major population centres was also part of the New World Order and United Nations Agenda 21 to keep people from the country areas and to concentrate them within major urban areas, particularly super cities. But surely that was crazy. These agendas would have had to have been planned decades ago for that to be true. With the benefit of hindsight, it was clear that all of these modifications were population control measures. They were designed to ensure that there was no mass migration of people and that the people stayed put. They sheltered in place. It was also a lucky coincidence that many shopping malls, many warehouses and other public buildings seemingly had coincidental architectural features that enabled them to be rapidly and easily converted to access control points, to guard towers. So there were choke points, and block points, and catch points, and should people find ways of getting round all the various points, there were eyes in the sky, blimps and drones, 24/7, watching and recording everything. Nobody moved without the government knowing about it. Of course, the mainstream media, which by now was really the complete voice of the government, if it wasn't already before, the mainstream media said this was for the safety and well-being of the people, and that it was much safer and more comfortable for people to shelter in place. Those people who were unfortunate enough to find themselves stuck in strange towns and cities when the public transport system went off, temporarily of course, and nobody was allowed in and out of towns and cities where they currently were. Those poor, unfortunate people were taken to converted sports stadiums and to tented centres outside of public buildings, and in some cases even prisons, penitentiaries, in order to give them a roof over their head and meals in their belly. After all, that's what it was all about. The government was there to help us. The government was there to protect us, to provide us with water and food and safety and security and everything that we could possibly want. Also, the mainstream media reported. In the mainstream media, there were reports that some people, probably these domestic terrorist groups called preppers or hoarders, they didn't like having their freedom to travel restricted, and they didn't like some of the other authoritarian acts that were now being enforced. Some of them resisted, and they got into fights and skirmishes with local police and some of the regional and national military units. This wasn't isolated to just one or two towns and cities. It started to become quite common. Other reports came in that gangs were organising themselves into hit squads, and they were raiding the food distribution centres. We didn't see any pictures of this on the mainstream media, but as the mainstream media always told us exactly what was going on, we had no reason to doubt it. And many people called on the government to do more. The various governments quickly introduced martial law, ostensibly to protect the public, the infrastructure, and the remaining existing supplies. Anybody who had more than 1 week's supply of food in their homes was ordered to turn it over to the state distribution points for the welfare and benefit of the community. Hoarders were frowned upon and thought of as selfish individuals who had caused the shortages in the stores and the supermarkets, because if they weren't hoarding all of the supplies, then there would have been enough to go round. Well, that's what was reported in the mainstream media anyway. Under martial law, many properties, many people's homes were entered and searched, and some police and military units refused. They stated strange things like it was against their conscience, or it was against their constitution, or it was against common law and decency and not what they signed up to. But these were made examples of and soon replaced by private contractors who had no qualms with taking food supplies that these hoarders had selfishly stored up for themselves. There was, of course, some resistance. Many of these hoarders decided that they would fight to keep what was theirs. They didn't want to share with the community, and fights and skirmishes broke out. But they were dealt with quite quickly by the heavily militarized police units, the military hardware at their disposal, and of course the private contractors, fresh back from many war zones around the world, were quite happy to utilize the same tactics and procedures that they had used in places as diverse as Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and in some cases even Yemen and Somalia. So resistance soon faded, and most people saw sense and handed over their weapons, any ammunition they had, spare water, food, and fuel for the welfare of the community. Although the violence and disorder on the streets was quickly and very firmly dealt with, food supplies to the larger towns and all of the cities were badly hit. Supplies were reaching the towns and cities, but not at the levels previously experienced, and people were experiencing shortages of essential items. By this stage, everyone in a city or major town had been issued with an identity card that also doubled as a ration book. Now, it wasn't just a simple piece of paper or card, it was actually a RFID enabled smart card that allowed the authorities to fairly and evenly distribute food and other resources from one of the many food and resource distribution centres. Quite a few people didn't like the cards, not because they had to carry them around, but they were prone to loss or theft, and without one you would not get your daily supply of food and resources. Some people suggested other ways of doing this, such as subdermal implants and so forth, but this didn't take traction, at least not initially. Civil communication grids basically cell phone towers and Wi-Fi points and broadband internet connections at the domestic and commercial level were cut. The reason these were cut, according to the mainstream media, was that there was a significant risk that the cyber attackers, who the government had blamed for the total economic collapse, would return and they would wreak more damage. In order to protect us, the government decided that it was important that the civilian population would cut off from the internet and from other forms of communication, so that these hackers could not implant viruses or move any harmful malware through the communication system. The government reassured us all that all we needed to do was tune in to the mainstream news, and they would tell us all of the important news that we needed to know. And of course not to worry, because through martial law, order was now being restored. Staples that people had taken for granted previously, such as milk, bread and eggs, were in extreme short supply. The production facilities and the farm infrastructure and distribution network could no longer supply the milk and the eggs to the cities, and bread was in extremely short supply. Other foodstuffs started to become short in supply, particularly high energy, high protein foodstuffs. But the water continued to flow, and just enough food and essential supplies, hygiene supplies and medical supplies, did continue to enter the city and major towns that were affected by the lockdown. Supplies of chocolate and some other luxury goods began to come through, special treats from the government, and this did seem to genuinely pacify the people. Or at least they were certainly pacified when they went to the distribution points under the watchful eye of armed guards in the towers and inside the armoured police and military vehicles outside of these points. For the most part, people were happy to queue for many hours to obtain some basic supplies. Times had suddenly become very hard, but for the most part, people coped with it and persevered. And they were happy knowing that they were all under the watchful eye of the government, who was there to protect them and keep them safe from rioters and looters and those who would seek to do them harm. And certainly seeing tanks on the streets, soldiers in uniform and militarised police in armoured vehicles, it certainly made most people feel quite safe and secure.